My birthday should have been a quiet celebration. But the moment the candles were lit, my daughter-in-law lunged forward, grabbed the cake, and smashed it into my face, while my son laughed like it was the funniest thing he had seen all year. And as I fell backward, hitting the edge of the table, I tasted blood mixing with frosting. While they told me to stop being dramatic and insisted it was just a joke, I wiped my eyes and tried to breathe through the sting in my cheek. A strange numbness spread across the left side of my face, something they ignored completely as they walked away, calling me sensitive and unable to take fun. But the next morning when I forced myself to the ER, the doctor took one look at my X-ray and his entire expression changed. He didn't smile. He didn't speak. He simply stepped out of the room, picked up the phone, and called 911. And at that moment, I realized this was not an accident, not a joke, not a harmless prank. It was the result of something darker that had been festering inside my home long before the cake ever touched my skin. And if you stay with me through this story, you will see exactly what the doctor discovered, why the authorities reacted the way they did, and how the truth that emerged twisted every relationship in my family, until the very people who mocked me at my own birthday ended up facing consequences they never imagined. And I promise you, the ending of this story will leave you breathless, because humiliation was only the beginning, and the real revenge had not even started yet. My name is Luther Grant. I'm 65 years old, a retired bridge engineer who spent 4 decades designing structures meant to carry people safely from one side to another. My wife Margaret passed away 3 years ago. And since then, I've learned that some bridges are impossible to build, especially the ones that lead back to your own son. When the invitation arrived, I wanted to believe it was real. Vanessa had called me herself, her voice unusually warm, almost tender. "We're throwing you a birthday party, Dad. Daniel and I want to make it special." I replayed those words a dozen times that week, searching for sincerity, the way a man searches for water in a desert. Maybe she had changed, maybe 3 years of widowhood had softened her view of me. Maybe my son had finally spoken up. I ironed my best shirt that Saturday morning. The pale blue one, Margaret always said, brought out my eyes. I polished my shoes until they reflected the ceiling light. I stopped at the wine shop and picked out a bottle of Pinot Noir, something elegant but not too expensive, because I knew Vanessa would find a way to criticize. Either extreme standing in front of the mirror before leaving. I told myself this could be a turning point. I wanted so desperately to be wrong about her. The house was full of people I half recognized, neighbors, friends of Vanessa's, a few colleagues of Daniel's. From the office balloons hung from the ceiling, a banner stretched across the living room wall, "Happy 60th Luther," for a moment standing in the doorway with that bottle of wine in my hands. I felt something I had not felt in years. Hope Vanessa greeted me with a wide smile and a hug that lasted exactly long enough for the guest to know, "There's the birthday boy," she announced, her voice bright as a commercial. She took the wine from my hands, glanced at the label, and set it aside without comment. Then she leaned close to my ear, and the warmth evaporated. "You smell like an old man," she whispered. "Try not to embarrass us tonight." I said nothing. I had learned long ago that responding only made things worse throughout the evening. She performed beautifully for her audience. She laughed at the right moments, touched my shoulder when others were watching, and called me Dad with exaggerated affection. But whenever no one was looking, her mask slipped. "Don't eat too much. You'll look bloated in the photos. Just smile and stay quiet. That's all you're good for." Each whisper landed like a small knife between my ribs, precise and practiced. Daniel floated somewhere in the background, refilling drinks, avoiding eye contact with me, my own son. I kept hoping he would walk over, put a hand on my shoulder, say something, anything that acknowledged I was more than a prop at my own party. But he never did. When the cake came out, everyone gathered around the dining table. 65 candles blazed like a small fire. Vanessa stood beside me, one hand resting on my back, in a gesture that looked supportive but felt like a warning, "Make-a-wish, Dad," she said loudly, and the room erupted in encouraging applause. I leaned forward, drew a breath, and closed my eyes. I wished for peace. I wished for my son to see the truth. I wished for Margaret, who would have known exactly what to say. The shove came before I could exhale. Vanessa's palm struck my upper back with force that could not have been accidental. My face plunged into the cake, frosting filling my nostrils, and the momentum carried me backward. I stumbled, arms flailing, and then the back of my skull connected with the sharp corner of the dining table. The crack echoed through the room, or maybe only through my own head. I collapsed onto the floor, and when I opened my eyes, I saw red and white swirling together, blood and frosting laughter. Someone was laughing. "Oh my God, Dad, you're so clumsy," Daniel said. His voice strained, his chuckle hollow. Vanessa covered her mouth, eyes wide with theatrical concern. "It was just a little joke. You're being too sensitive." The guests shifted uncomfortably, a few nervous giggles. Someone muttered something about getting napkins. But one face did not smile. Caroline Miller, my neighbor of 15 years, and Margaret's oldest friend, stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. Her expression was not shock, it was recognition. The look of someone who had been waiting for a moment she had long predicted. I tried to sit up, but a strange numbness was spreading down my neck, creeping toward my shoulders. The room tilted, voices became distant. Something was very wrong. I do not remember how I got home. The night exists only in fragments, someone helping me to my feet. The cold air outside, headlights blurring into streaks of white. And then darkness. When I woke the next morning, I was lying on my bed, still wearing the blue shirt Margaret had loved, now stained with dried frosting, and something dark. The pain announced itself before I even opened my eyes. It pulsed through my skull in waves. Each beat my heart, sending a fresh shock through my temple and down into my jaw. When I finally forced my eyelids apart, only one obeyed. The left side of my face had swollen so severely that the eye was nearly sealed shut, the flesh around it tight and hot to the touch. I raised a trembling hand to explore the damage and felt a ridge of crusted blood matted into my hair just above the ear. The room swam. When I tried to sit up, I gripped the edge of the mattress and waited for the walls to stop tilting, breathing through my mouth, because my nose felt packed with something solid. The mirror across the room reflected a stranger, half his face, purple and misshapen, his good eye, bloodshot and glassy, his lips cracked and pale. I looked like a man who had been beaten in an alley, in a way I suppose I had been. Then my phone sat on the nightstand where I must have dropped it. The screen showed one notification, a text message from Daniel sent at 7:14 that morning. "Vanessa says you should. I'm cleaning the kitchen. You made a mess last night." I read it 3 times, waiting for the rest. An apology, a question about how I was feeling, a single word of concern. But there was nothing else, just an instruction relayed from his wife, as if I were hired help who had forgotten to finish a chore. I stared at those cold words until the screen dimmed, feeling something heavier than pain settle into my chest. This was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the young man whose college tuition I had paid by working overtime for 6 straight years, the only family I had left, and he could not even ask if I was alive. I set the phone face down and did not reply. The knock came just before 903 firm, raps the kind that expected an answer. I shuffled to the door, one hand braced against the wall for balance, and pulled it open to find Carolyn standing on my welcome mat with her purse already over her shoulder and her car keys in hand. She took one look at my face and inhaled sharply, but she did not gasp or look away. Instead, her jaw tightened with something that resembled anger. "Luther Grant," she said quietly. "Margaret would never want to see you like this." Hearing my wife's name after so many months of silence hit me harder than any blow. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words tangled somewhere in my throat. Caroline did not wait for an explanation. "We are going to the emergency room. Now do not argue with me." She stepped forward, took my elbow with surprising strength, and guided me toward her car, as though she had done this before, as though she had been preparing to do this for a long time. The drive was a blur of pain and half-formed thoughts. I leaned my head against the cool window and watched the familiar streets of my neighborhood slide past without really seeing them. Carolyn drove in focused silence for several minutes before speaking again. Margaret worried about Vanessa. She said her eyes fixed on the road more than she ever told you before she passed. She asked me to watch over you, made me promise. I turned my head, wincing at the effort. Watch over me? Why would she? A fresh wave of nausea cut my question short. I pressed my palm against my temple and concentrated on not vomiting in Caroline's car. She glanced at me with concern but did not push further. Some conversations I understood would have to wait until I could think clearly enough to hear them. The emergency room was bright and loud and smelled of antiseptic. A nurse took one look at my face and fast-tracked me past the waiting area. Within 20 minutes, I was lying on a narrow bed behind a curtain. While a technician positioned my head for X-rays, the machine hummed and clicked, then I waited. Dr. Mason arrived with the images displayed on a tablet. He was a tall man in his mid-40s with steady hands and a calm demeanor, the kind of physician who had clearly delivered bad news many times before. But as he studied the X-ray, something shifted in his expression. His lips pressed together. The color drained slightly from his cheeks. He swiped to another image, then another, his frown deepening with each one without a word. He stepped out of the room through the gap in the curtain. I watched him walk to the nurse's station, pick up a phone, and begin dialing. When Dr. Mason returned, he was not alone. A nurse followed close behind her expression carefully. Neutral in the medical professionals learned to mask concern. He pulled a stool close to my bed and sat down, placing the tablet with my X-rays face up on his knee. For a long moment he simply looked at me, not at my injuries but at my eyes, as if measuring something invisible. "Mr. Grant?" He began, his voice low and deliberate. "This was not a minor accident. You have a deep fracture in your left cheekbone, extending dangerously close to the infraorbital nerve, a few millimeters deeper, and you might have lost sensation in half your face permanently." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "But that is not what concerns me most." He turned the tablet toward me and pointed to a series of faint white lines scattered across the images like cracks in old plaster. "These are healed fractures here along the orbital rim. Here on your jaw and here near your temple, they are old months, maybe years, but they form a pattern, Mr. Grant." The kind of pattern I have seen before. My throat tightened. "I have had some falls," I said quickly. "I'm not as steady as I used to be last winter. I slipped on the ice, and once I tripped over a garden hose." Mr. Grant's voice was gentle but firm, cutting through my fumbled explanations like a scalpel. "These fractures are not consistent with accidental falls. The locations, the angles, the varying stages of healing, they suggest repeated trauma, inflicted trauma." I wanted to argue. I wanted to explain that Vanessa could be difficult, but she was not violent. That last night was an isolated ins that family sometimes had rough patches, but the words died in my mouth because somewhere deep beneath my denial, A quieter voice was asking why I had so many excuses memorized. Dr. Mason folded his hands on his lap under the Elder Abuse Prevention Act. I am legally required to report suspected abuse to the authorities. This is not optional, and it is not a request I've already made the call. A detective from the Adult Protective Services Unit is on her way. The room seemed to shrink around me. That is not necessary. I said, my voice weaker than I intended. It was just an accident. My daughter-in-law pushed me as a joke, and I fell. It happens. He studied me with something between pity and resolve. Mr. Grant, my 20 years of emergency medicine. I've heard that exact sentence more times than I can count. It is almost never true before I could respond. The curtain parted and a woman stepped through. She was perhaps 50, with short gray streaked hair and tired eyes that had clearly seen too much. She wore a plain blazer over a dark blouse, and a badge hung from a lanyard around her neck. There was no uniform, no intimidating presence, just a quiet authority that filled the small space without demanding attention. Mr. Grant, I'm Officer Linda Carver. I work with the Elder Abuse Investigation Unit. She pulled up a chair and sat down at an angle that felt conversational rather than confrontational. Dr. Mason has briefed me on your injuries. I would like to ask you a few questions if you are feeling up to it. I nodded, though every instinct screamed at me to refuse. She began with simple, "Thing is my name, my address, who I lived with, how I had arrived at the hospital." Her tone was patient and unhurried, as if we had all the time in the world. But her eyes never stopped observing. I noticed how she watched my hands, my posture, the micro expressions that flickered across my face before I could suppress them. "Can you tell me what happened last night?" she asked. I recounted the party, the cake, the fall. I called it a joke gone wrong, an accident, a misunderstanding each time I mentioned Vanessa's name. My voice dropped without my permission. My fingers twitched against the hospital blanket I could not meet. Officer Carver's eyes, she noticed everything, your daughter-in-law, she said slowly. "Vanessa, how would you describe your relationship with her?" I hesitated too long. "Fine," I said. "We are fine, Linda." Tilted. Her head slightly. "You flinched just now when I said her name?" "I did not, you did." She leaned forward, her voice softening to something almost maternal. "Mr. Grant, I have been doing this job for 18 years. I have seen what happens when people stay silent to protect the ones who hurt them. I've watched families bury secrets until those secrets bury them. Instead, I once worked a case where I believed a man's excuses, and 6 months later he was dead." Her jaw tightened. I will not make that mistake again. The silence stretched between us. I could hear the beeping of monitors somewhere down the hall, the murmur of voices, the distant wail of an ambulance. My chest ached with something heavier than bruises. Linda leaned closer, her eyes searching mine, Grant. She asked softly, "Has this happened?" before the question hung in the air between us. And something inside me finally cracked. Not the bone-deep fractures Dr. Mason had shown me on the screen, but something older, a wall I had spent years building brick by. Careful brick mortared with silence and denial. I looked at Linda Carver's patient eyes and felt the exhaustion of carrying secrets that had grown too heavy to bear. Yes, I whispered the word, came out like a confession. Yes, it has happened before. And then for the first time in my life, I told someone the truth. It started small. I explained the way these things are. I always do a comment here, a criticism there. Vanessa called me forgetful. When I misplaced my keys, she called me slow. When I did not understand a joke within a year of her marriage to Daniel, the words had sharpened into weapons useless, burden, waste of space. She would say them quietly, almost casually. When no one else could hear at family dinner, she would smile and pass me the salt while whispering that I was ruining her appetite just by being there. The physical incidents came later. A shove in the hallway when Daniel was in the bathroom. A door closed too quickly on my fingers. My belongings disappearing photographs of Margaret books. I treasured a watch my father had given me, only to be found weeks later in the trash or mysteriously broken. She locked me out of Thanksgiving dinner, once claiming I had arrived late when I had been standing on the porch for 20 minutes. Daniel believed her. He always believed her. Linda listened without interrupting her pen, moving steadily across a small notebook. When I finished, my voice hoarse and my hands trembling against the hospital blanket. She set the pen down and looked at me with an expression I had not expected. It was not pity. It was recognition, Mr. Grant. She said quietly. What you are describing is not a family conflict. It is not a personality clash or a difficult relationship. What you're describing is a crime systematic abuse designed to isolate you, control you, and make you doubt your own reality? She paused, letting the words sink in. This has a name, and there are laws against it. I wanted to argue. Some part of me still wanted to minimize, to excuse, to protect the image of the family I had hoped we could become. But the evidence was there in black and white on the X-rays, written in the pattern of old fractures I had blamed on clumsiness and age. A soft knock interrupted us. Carolyn appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. Linda excused herself to make a phone call, giving us a moment of privacy. Carolyn pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down heavily, as if the weight of what she was about to say had been pressing on her for years. I saw you talking to the detective, she said. Good, it is past time. I shook my head weakly. Caroline, this is all getting out of hand. It was just a birthday party gone wrong. I do not want to cause trouble for Daniel. Daniel. She said his name like a verdict, Luther. I love that boy like a nephew. I watched him grow up, but he has been blind for years, and his blindness has cost you too much. She reached out and took my hand. Her grip surprisingly strong. Vanessa has never seen you as a person. You are an obstacle to her, a source of money and property and nothing more. Margaret knew this. The mention of my wife's name made my chest tighten. Margaret never said anything to me. She didn't want to burden you while she was sick, but she said plenty to me. Carolyn's voice dropped. She tried to warn Daniel before she passed. She begged him to see what Vanessa really was. But he would not listen. Love made him deaf. So Margaret made me promise something. She made me swear that if anything ever happened to you, I would not stay silent. I would not let you disappear the way so many elder people do quietly and conveniently. I stared at her, processing the weight of her words. Margaret had seen the danger years ago. She had tried to protect me, even as the cancer was stealing her away. And I had been too blind, too loyal, too desperate to preserve the illusion of family harmony to see what was happening. Linda returned a few minutes later. She handed me a business card with the name of a victim's advocate and a 24-hour hotline number. I am officially opening an investigation, she said. In the meantime, I need you to stay away from Vanessa. No visits, no phone calls, no contact of any kind. If she reaches out to you, do not respond. Document everything and call me immediately. I nodded, feeling the strange vertigo of a man whose entire life had just been reclassified. I was not a clumsy old man prone to accidents. I was a victim. The words sat uneasily in my mind, sharp-edged and unfamiliar after Linda left. Carolyn helped me gather my few belongings. A nurse came by with discharge paperwork and instructions for managing my injuries through it all. My phone sat silent on the bedside table, and I was grateful for the quiet. Then, just as I was putting on my coat, the screen lit up a text message from Vanessa. I should have ignored it. Linda had told me not to engage, but my hand moved on its own, reaching for the phone before I could stop myself. The message was short, only 12 words. If you say one more word to the police, you will regret it. I stared at Vanessa's message until the screen dimmed and went dark. My hands were trembling. Whether from pain or fear, I could not tell. Carolyn saw my expression and reached for the phone, but I pulled it away before she could read the words. Some threats are too heavy to share. 2 days passed. The swelling in my face began to subside, though the bruises had deepened into shades of purple and green that made me look like a man who had lost a fight with the pavement. Linda called twice to check on me and remind me to avoid contact with Vanessa. I assured her I understood, but there was something I needed to do first. I had left things at Daniel's house. Small things, but irreplaceable. A box of Margaret's letters that I'd been sorting through before the party. A framed photograph of our wedding day that I had brought to show my grandchildren, my reading glasses, my medication, my journal. Vanessa would throw them all away if I did not retrieve them. I knew her well enough to be certain of that Caroline offered to drive me, but I refused. This was something I needed to face alone. I took a taxi across town, watching the familiar streets slide past with a strange sense of detachment. The neighborhood where Daniel and Vanessa lived was beautiful manicured lawns, expensive cars, houses designed to project success and stability. I used to feel proud when I visited. Now the perfection felt menacing, like the polished exterior of a trap. The taxi dropped me at the curb. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, gathering my courage. The house looked exactly as it always did. White shutters, red brick, a welcome mat by the front door that had never welcomed me. I walked up the path slowly each step, sending a dull ache through my healing skull. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open. Vanessa stood in the entrance with her arms crossed her body, filling the frame like a barricade. She was dressed impeccably as always, her hair styled, her makeup flawless, but her eyes were cold, and her smile was the kind that preceded cruelty. "You are not welcome here," she said, her voice flat and final. "You are destroying our family with your lies, and I will not let you spread any more poison in this house." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just need to collect some of my belongings. Margaret's letters, the wedding photograph. My medication, your medication." She laughed a short and bitter sound. "Convenient excuse. Did the police teach you to say that? Did they coach you on how to play the victim?" Behind her in the dim hallway, I saw Daniel. My son stood several feet back, half hidden in shadow. His pocket sur slumped and defeated. He was looking at the floor when I tried to meet his eyes. He turned his head away, but I saw enough his hands were shaking visibly at his sides, his eyes in the brief moment they caught. The light were red-rimmed and hollow, the eyes of a man who had not slept in days, and on his wrists, just visible beneath the cuffs of his sleeves, I noticed faint bruises, dark marks in the shape of fingers, as if someone had gripped him far too tightly. My heart clenched. "Daniel," I said softly, trying to reach past Vanessa's blockade son. "Are you all right?" He flinched at the sound of his name still. He did not look up. Vanessa stepped forward, forcing me to step back. "Do not speak to him. He has nothing to say to you." "None of us do. He is my son. He is my husband." Her voice turned to ice. "And if you keep making trouble, Luther, if you say one more word to the police or try to turn anyone else against me, you will never see your grandchildren again. I will make absolutely sure of it. You will be erased from their lives like you never existed." The threat hit me like a physical blow. My grandchildren Emma and Jack, 5 and 7 years old. The only pure joy left in my life since Margaret passed. I had taught Emma to tie her shoes. I had read Jack his first chapter book, and now Vanessa was telling me I could lose them forever. I looked past her again, desperately seeking some sign of protest from Daniel, but he stood motionless. A statue of shame and silence. He would not defend me. He could not even look at me. Vanessa disappeared into the house and returned a moment later with a small cardboard box, which she shoved into my arm. I glanced inside. Margaret's letters were there, along with the photograph in my glasses. My medication was missing. "That is everything," she said curtly. "Now leave and do not come back." The door slammed in my face before I could respond. I stood on the porch for a long moment, clutching the box against my chest, trying to process what had just happened. The grandson I had held at his christening was being used as a weapon against me. The son I had raised was too broken or too afraid to speak a single word in my defense. And somewhere behind those white shutters, a woman I had never truly understood was orchestrating it all. I turned and began walking down the path toward the street. That was when I saw the car. It was parked across the road. A silver sedan with tinted windows behind the wheel sat a woman I recognized, Brenda Reed, Vanessa's mother. She was watching me not casually, not with the idle curiosity of a neighbor. She was studying me the way a predator studies wounded prey. Her face showed no expression. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply observed, taking mental notes on the broken old man shuffling away with a cardboard box. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. I thought I'd been fighting my daughter-in-law. I thought this was about one cruel woman and one weak son and one shattered birthday party. But standing there on that perfect suburban street, watching Brenda Reed watch me, I realized the truth. This was something much larger, and I was only beginning to see its shape. Caroline was waiting on her porch when the taxi brought me back. She took one look at my face and asked no questions. Instead, she simply held the door open and guided me inside, taking the cardboard box from my trembling hands as though she had done this 100 times before. Perhaps in her mind she had been rehearsing for this moment for years. Her house smelled of lavender and old books, a comforting scent that reminded me painfully of the home Margaret and I had shared before the cancer took her. Caroline LED'd me to a small guest room with clean sheets and a window overlooking her garden. She told me to rest, to take as long as I needed. I lay down on the bed, fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling, my mind replaying the image of Brenda Reed's cold, watching eyes. I did not sleep. I do not think I even closed my eyes that evening after a quiet dinner of soup and bread that I barely touched. Caroline asked me to join her in the living room. Her tone was different now, not the brisk efficiency of a caretaker, but something heavier. She seemed to be steeling herself for a difficult conversation. In the corner of the room sat an old wooden chest I had never noticed before. It was dark oak, worn smooth by decades of hands, with brass hinges that had long ago lost their shine. Caroline knelt before it slowly, her knees protesting the movement, and lifted the lid with the reverence of someone opening a sacred text. Inside was a thick leather journal, the kind with a strap that wrapped around to hold it closed. She lifted it carefully and carried it to the couch where I was sitting. The weight of it surprised me when she placed it in my hands. I opened to the first page and saw a handwriting I didn't recognize. Neat, precise, dated. "What is this?" I asked Carolyn, settled into the armchair across from me. That she said quietly, "Is 3 years of watching, 3 years of documenting, 3 years of keeping a promise?" I turned the pages slowly, dates, names, descriptions of events, written in careful detail. I saw my own name appear again and again. Luther said Luther was excluded. Luther arrived, but was not allowed inside, and Vanessa's name, always Vanessa, accompanied by lists of cruelties. I had tried so hard to forget. I do not understand. I murmured, though somewhere deep inside I was beginning to. Caroline folded her hands in her lap. Margaret and I were friends for 40 years. Luther, 40 years. We met as young teachers at the same elementary school. Shared an apartment for 2 years before either of us married. Stood beside each other at our weddings. There was nothing I would not have done for her. Her voice wavered slightly, and there was nothing she would not have done for you. I looked up from the journal, my throat tight before she died. Caroline continued. Margaret called me to her bedside. She was weak by then. So weak she could barely lift her head. But her mind was clear. She told me she was worried about you. She said Vanessa was dangerous, that she had seen signs Daniel refused to acknowledge. She begged me to watch over you after she was gone. I remembered those final weeks, Margaret drifting in and out of sleep, her hand always reaching for mine. I had thought her occasional agitation was just the illness, the medication, the fear of leaving. I never imagined she was trying to protect me from something she could already see coming. She made me promise 3 things, Caroline said, holding up her fingers one by one. First, stay close to Luther. Second, document everything Vanessa does. And third, when the time comes, give him the proof he needs. She gestured toward the journal. This is the second promise. Every insult, every exclusion, every time she humiliated you or shut you out, I wrote it all down, dates, times, witnesses. When there were any, I turned to a random page near the middle and read an entry dated 14 months ago. March 17th. Luther arrived for Sunday dinner. Vanessa told him the time had been changed and he had missed it. Daniel's car was still in the driveway. I watched Luther walk back to his apartment alone. My stomach turned with the memory, another entry. 6 months later, Vanessa threw away the photo albums Luther brought. To show the children, I retrieved them from the trash. They are now in my possession for safekeeping. The journals were not just observations, they were evidence, a paper tale of systematic cruelty, written in Caroline's steady hand, waiting for the day when I would finally need to prove what had been done to me. One entry near the end caught my attention. I read it twice, my pulse quickening. October 3rd, Vanessa receives frequent mail from her mother, Brenda Reed. The envelopes are thick, official-looking. They arrive at least once a week. I do not know what they contain, but the pattern is unusual. They seem to be planning something. I do not know what yet, but I fear for Luther's safety. I looked up at Caroline, my mind racing. Brenda. I said, you noticed her too. Caroline nodded slowly. Vanessa did not become what she is by accident. That woman raised her, trained her, whatever is happening to you, Luther. I believe Brenda is behind it. I closed the journal. My hands on, steady the weight of Margaret's foresight, pressed down on me like a physical force. Even dying, even slipping away from this world. She had been thinking of me, protecting me, building a shield I did not know existed until now. Caroline reached over and took the journal gently from my hands. She walked back to the wooden chest, placed it inside, and paused with her hand resting on the lid. Margaret left you something else, she said, her back still turned. Something she asked me to keep until you were truly ready to use. I stood up. What is it? Caroline closed the chest, saw, and turned to face me. Her expression was careful, guarded, as if she was weighing how much more I could bear. In one night, it is not time yet, she said. But soon, when this fight becomes real, you will need more than a journal, and Margaret made sure you would have it. I spent a sleepless night turning Caroline's words over in my mind. Margaret had left me something else, a secret, kept for 3 years, waiting in that old wooden chest like a time capsule from a woman who had loved me enough to plan for dangers she would never live to see. I wanted to ask Caroline more, to demand she show me everything right now. But something in her expression told me that pushing would accomplish nothing. Margaret had given her instructions, and Caroline would follow them to the letter. The next morning, Caroline made a phone call an hour later. We're sitting in the office of Graham Whitfield, an attorney whose name I had never heard, but whose reputation, Caroline assured me, was formidable. He specialized in elder abuse cases, financial exploitation, family fraud, the quiet crimes committed against people too old or too trusting to fight back his office, was modest lined with legal books and framed news clippings about cases he had won. He was a man in his mid-50s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. Carolyn handed him the leather journal without ceremony. 3 years of documentation. She said every incident I witnessed or heard about secondhand dates, descriptions, patterns. Graham spent nearly an hour reading through the entries. While Caroline and I sat in silence occasionally, he would pause, make a note, or flip back to compare 2 pages. When he finally closed the journal, his expression was grim but satisfied. This documentation is invaluable. He said it establishes a clear pattern of premeditated exploitation, whoever advised you to keep these records. Mrs. Miller knew exactly what they were doing. It was Luther's late wife Caroline replied, she saw this coming before anyone else. Graham nodded slowly as if this confirmed something he had already suspected. Then he turned to me. Mr. Grant, I need to ask you a direct question. Do you own property? The question caught me off guard. Yes. A house I have lived there for 40 years. And what would you estimate it is worth in today's market? I hesitated. I had not thought about the value in years, I suppose, 600. 200, perhaps more. The neighborhood has changed, prices have gone up. Graham leaned back in his chair. That is what this is about, Mr. Grant. Your daughter-in-law does not want you out of her life. She wants you out of your home, a property worth over $500,000 owned outright by an elderly widower with one heir, your son Daniel. If something were to happen to you, or if you were declared mentally incompetent, that asset would pass to your son, and if your son is controlled by his wife, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The logic was horrifyingly clear. Vanessa had never hated me for personal reasons. She had hated me because I was standing between her and a fortune. There is more. Graham continued. He slid a folder across his desk. I did some preliminary research on Brenda Reed, your daughter-in-law's mother. 15 years ago, she was employed as a branch manager at First Continental Bank in Arizona. She was terminated for what the official records call accounting irregularities, the case was. Settled privately, and she was never prosecuted. But the pattern of behavior described in the settlement documents is disturbingly familiar. Elderly customers with large accounts, unexplained transfers, missing funds. I stared at the folder, my stomach turning. She has done this before. It appears so. And she taught her daughter. Well, Graham closed the folder. Mr. Grant, you are not dealing with a difficult family member. You are dealing with a predator, possibly 2 of them, and they have been planning this for a very long time. The drive back to Caroline's house was quiet. I watched the streets pass without seeing them. My mind consumed by the enormity of what I had learned 40 years of mortgage payments, of repairs and improvements, of building a home where Margaret and I had raised our son, all of it reduced to a target on a balance sheet. Vanessa did not see a family when she looked at me. She saw a number. That night I could not sleep. I lay in the room staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house. Settle and creak around me. Just past midnight, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. The caller ID showed Daniel's name. I answered immediately, my heart pounding. Daniel. His voice was barely a whisper, shaking so badly I could hardly understand him. Dad, Dad. I need to talk to you. Son, what is wrong? Are you safe? I cannot not on the phone. He sounded terrified, like a child hiding from a monster in the dark. There's something I have to tell you in person. It is about Vanessa, about what she has been doing. I should have told you years ago, but I was afraid, Dad. I was so afraid. My chest tightened. Daniel, listen to me. Whatever it is, we can. The line went dead. I tried calling back immediately. The phone rang once and went to voicemail. I tried again, same result a third time. Nothing either. Daniel had turned off his phone, or someone had turned it off for him. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, a courier arrived at Carolyn's door. He handed me an envelope with a law firm's return address in Boston in the corner. I opened it with trembling fingers and read the letter inside. It was from Vanessa's attorney. The language was formal, clinical, designed to intimidate, but the accusation at its center hit me like a blow to the chest. Luther Grant is hereby accused of threatening and intimidating Mrs. Vanessa Grant, a pregnant woman, during an altercation at her residence. Mrs. Grant fears for her safety and the safety of her unborn child. A restraining order will be sought if Mr. Grant does not cease all contact immediately pregnant. She was claiming to be pregnant, and she was using that lie to paint me as a monster. I brought the letter to Graham's office that same afternoon. My hand still unsteady as I placed it on his desk. He read it slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition to something that almost resembled dark amusement. When he finished, he set the paper down and laughed, a short, bitter sound that held no joy. This, he said, tapping the letter with one finger, is a textbook Darvo response. Deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. It is the oldest trick in the abuser's playbook. She's trying to flip the narrative to make you the aggressor and herself the victim. The pregnancy claim is particularly clever. It adds emotional weight and makes anyone who questions her look heartless. I shook my head. But it is a lie. She cannot be pregnant. Daniel would have told me. Would he? Graham raised an eyebrow. Your son has not been able to tell you much of anything from what you have described. And even if the pregnancy is real, which I strongly doubt, it does not change what she has done to you. This letter is designed to intimidate, to silence, to make you retreat. We are not going to let it work. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing notes in quick, sharp strokes. I need you to authorize me to run a full financial background. Check credit reports, loan histories, any accounts opened in your name over the past 5 years. Given what we already know about Brenda Reed, I want to see if there are deeper patterns we have missed. I signed the authorization forms without hesitation at this point. I had nothing left to hide and nothing left to lose. 3 days later, Graham called me back to his office. His tone on the phone had been clipped urgent when I arrived. He was standing at his window, with his back to the door, staring out at the parking lot below. He didn't turn around immediately. Sit down, Mr. Grant, he said quietly. I sat. The chair felt harder than I remembered. Graham finally turned and placed a thick folder on the desk between us. I found something I was hoping I would not find. He opened the folder and spread out a series of documents. Bank statements, loan applications, credit reports. Over the past 3 years, someone has opened multiple credit accounts in your name. 3 personal loans, totaling $180,000, 2 credit cards with combined limits of 40,000. All of them show your signature. All of them list your home address. I stared at the papers, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. That is impossible. I never signed any of these. I've never taken out a loan in my life except for my mortgage, and that was paid off 15 years ago. I know Graham's voice was grim. The signatures are forgeries, good ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Someone with access to your personal information, your social security number, your bank details, your identification documents, has been systematically borrowing money in your name, and based on the payment patterns, they have been using your home as implied collateral. The room seemed to tilt my home. They are trying to take my home. They are trying to bury you in debt. First, Graham corrected, if these loans default, and some of them are already close, your credit will be destroyed. You will face lawsuits, wage garnishments, if you had any income, and eventually foreclosure proceedings by the time you realized what was happening, it would be too late, you would lose everything. And they would be positioned to swoop in as concerned family members, offering to help manage your affairs? I thought of Vanessa's cold smile, Brenda's watchful eyes, the way Daniel could not meet my gaze. This had been planned for years. Every insult, every exclusion, every cruelty, all of it was preparation, softening me up, isolating me, making me doubt myself until I was too weak to fight back. Graham closed the folder and leaned forward. Mr. Grant, I've seen this pattern before. 2 cases, one in Arizona, one in Nevada, both involved elderly men targeted by what appeared to be family members. Both involved forged documents and unexplained debts. Both cases were dropped due to insufficient evidence, because the victims either died or became too mentally compromised to testify. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The Nevada victim took his own life. 6 months after the case was closed, my throat tightened. You think this is connected? Think we are looking at something systematic? Something that goes beyond one greedy daughter-in-law? He stood and walked to his filing cabinet, pulling out additional folders. I'm going to request your complete financial records going back 10 years. Every transaction, every statement, every signature, and I need you to document everything from this point forward. Every phone call, every text message, every interaction with Vanessa or her mother. We are not just defending you anymore. Mr. Grant, we may be uncovering a pattern that spans multiple states and multiple victims. I left his office feeling like a man who had just been told he was standing on a fault line. The ground I had trusted my whole life was fracturing beneath me, revealing depths I had never imagined. That night, I sat in Caroline's living room, unable to eat, unable to read, unable to do anything but stare at the wall and wonder how I had been so blind for so long. Carolyn tried to comfort me, but there were no words that could ease the weight pressing down on my chest. Just before midnight, a knock came at the door. Caroline and I exchanged glances. No one visited at this hour. She rose slowly and peered through the window beside the entrance. Her expression shifted from caution to surprise. She opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch, his face wet with tears, his body trembling like a leaf in a storm. He looked like he had aged 10 years since I last saw him. His eyes were swollen, his clothes disheveled, and there was a desperation in his posture that I had never seen before. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. Dad, I need to tell you everything. Daniel collapsed into my arms before I could say a word. His body shook with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and broken. The kind of crying I had not heard from him since he was a small boy, waking from nightmares. I held him there on Caroline's porch, the midnight air cold against our backs, and let him weep until the trembling began to subside. Caroline quietly ushered us inside and disappeared into the kitchen, giving us the privacy that only an old friend knows how to offer. I guided Daniel to the couch and sat beside him, my hand resting on his shoulder. He looked destroyed, hollow-eyed, unshaven. The confidence I had once admired in him stripped away like paint peeling from old wood. Tell me, I said gently, whatever it is, tell me. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, struggling to find the words. I've known Dad for 6 months. I have known what Vanessa was doing to you. The loans, the documents, the plan to take your house. I knew about all of it. His voice cracked. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to tell you, but I could not. She has something on me. My chest tightened. What do you mean she has something on you? Daniel stared at the floor, shame radiating from every inch of his body. It started about 2 years ago. Vanessa threw a party at our house. I do not even remember what the occasion was. Her birthday, maybe? Or some promotion at her job. She kept refilling my glass all night. I thought she was just being affectionate. I didn't realize she was getting me drunk on purpose. He paused, his hands clenching into fists on his knees. At some point, she brought out a stack of doc legal papers. Financial forms, she said they were refinancing agreements for our own mortgage routine stuff that needed both signatures. I was so far gone, I could barely read the words. She guided my hand to the signature lines one after another. While her mother held a phone and recorded the whole thing, the mention of Brenda made my blood run cold. She was there. She was there, Daniel confirmed bitterly. Standing in the corner filming everything like it was a family video. I did not think anything of it at the time. I was too drunk to think it all. He finally looked up at me, his eyes red and raw. 6 months ago, I found copies of those documents in a locked drawer in Vanessa's office. I was looking for our tax records and I found the truth. Instead, the papers I signed were not refinancing agreements, Dad. They were loan applications, 3 of them totaling almost $200. 000, and every single one of them had your name on it, your social security number, your address. I had signed as a witness, verifying your identity and authorizing the loans on your behalf. The room seemed to close in around me, my son. My own son had unknowingly helped Vanessa forge my identity, and she had recorded the whole thing as insurance when I confronted her. Daniel continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. She laughed. She actually laughed. And then she showed me the video there. I was clear as day, signing document after document with a smile on my face. No one forced the pen into my hand. No one held a gun to my head. To anyone watching that footage, I looked like a willing participant. He began to shake again. She told me exactly what would happen if I ever said a word. She said, if you tell anyone I will show the police this video, you signed willingly, you will go to prison with me. And then she reminded me about Emma and Jack. She said if I was in prison, she would have full custody, would never see my children again. Tears spilled down his cheeks. I have been living in terror ever since, Dad. Every day I wake up knowing what she is doing to you. And knowing I cannot stop it every time she insults you or shuts you out. I want to scream the truth, but the words die in my throat because I know what she will do. I'm trapped. I've been trapped for 6 months watching her destroy you piece by piece while I stand there like a coward. I pulled my son close and held him the way I had held him when he was 5 years old, frightened of thunderstorms and convinced the world was ending. He was 36 now, a grown man with a career and children of his own. But in that moment, he was just a boy who had been manipulated by someone he trusted and terrorized into silence. Listen to me, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. You are not a criminal. You are a victim. Vanessa used you the same way she's been using me as a tool, a means to an end. She exploited your trust and your love. And your fear, that does not make you guilty. That makes you another person she has hurt. Daniel shook his head, but I signed those papers. My handwriting is on every page. How can anyone believe I did not know what I was doing? Because the truth has a way of surfacing, I said. And because we are going to prove it together, I am not going to let her destroy you, son. I am not going to let her destroy either of us. For a long moment. Neither of spoke. The clock on Caroline's mantel ticked softly, marking the passage of time that suddenly felt precious and fragile. Daniel's breathing gradually steadied, the trembling. Stopped, he pulled back slightly and looked at me with something I had not seen in his eyes for years. Hope within his expression shifted. A new weight settled over his features, as if he had just remembered something he had been trying to forget. There is one more thing, Dad. He wiped his eyes and swallowed hard. She is not really pregnant. The words hung in the air between us. Impossible, and yet somehow inevitable. I stared at my son, waiting for him to take them back to explain that he had misspoken or misunderstood, but his expression held nothing but grim certainty. What do you mean she is not pregnant? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and handed it to me. It was a receipt printed on thin thermal paper, the kind that comes from online orders. The item description read, "Silicone pregnancy, belly 7 to 9 months, realistic skin tone." The purchase date was 3 weeks ago. The shipping address was my son's house. "I found this in her desk drawer," Daniel said quietly. "Hidden under a stack of old magazines, she's been wearing a fake belly dad. The whole pregnancy is a lie." I read the receipt again, my mind struggling to accept what my eyes were seeing, a prosthetic belly. A costume she had turned motherhood itself into a prop for her scheme Caroline, who had returned from the kitchen with cups of tea none of us would drink. Leaned over my shoulder to look at the paper. Her face went pale. "I knew something was wrong," she murmured last week at the neighborhood association meeting. Vanessa was there, and I saw her drinking wine, a full glass of red wine. I remember thinking how strange it was for a pregnant woman. But I told myself perhaps she was having just a small amount. Now it makes sense, the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The pregnancy announcement had come just weeks before Vanessa's lawyer sent the threatening letter. She had timed it perfectly, creating sympathy, establishing herself as a vulnerable, expectant mother, making me look like a monster who would threaten a woman carrying a child. Every move had been calculated the next morning. I brought the receipt to Graham's office. He examined it for a long time, his jaw tightening with each passing second. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too many lies dressed up as truth. A fake pregnancy is a brilliant manipulation tactic, he said grimly. It creates immediate emotional leverage. Judges are hesitant to prosecute expectant mothers. Juries sympathize with them. Even seasoned investigators soften their approach when a pregnant woman is involved by claiming to be with child. Vanessa has bought herself time and sympathy. If we had pushed forward aggressively with our case, we would have looked like bullies attacking a vulnerable mother to be... He set the receipt down on his desk. "This is a delay tactic, pure and simple, and it is devastatingly effective. But now that we know the truth, we can use it against her. A woman who would fake a pregnancy to manipulate a legal proceeding is a woman capable of anything. This speaks directly to her character and her willingness to deceive that afternoon Officer Linda Carver called with news of her own. Her investigation into Brenda Reed had turned up something disturbing. A civil lawsuit filed 8 years ago in Arizona, an elderly man named Walter Simmons had accused Brenda of financial exploitation, claiming she had befriended him under false pretenses and systematically drained his savings. Over the course of 2 years, the case was withdrawn before it went to trial. Well, Linda explained over the phone. Mr. Simmons claimed he could not find sufficient documentation to prove his allegations. The records suggest Brenda had access to his home and may have destroyed evidence 2 years after the lawsuit was dropped. Walter Simmons died alone. In a state-funded nursing facility, he had lost his house, his retirement accounts. Everything. The official cause of death was heart failure, but the neighbor said he simply gave up. I closed my eyes, picturing a man I had never met, a man who had trusted the wrong person and paid for it with everything he had that could have been me, that still might be me. If we did not stop Vanessa and her mother in time, there is no statute of limitations on patterns. Linda continued, I'm coordinating with investigators in Arizona and Nevada. Now, if we can establish that Brenda has done this before, it strengthens our case enormously. These women are not amateurs. Mr. Grant, they are predators. And you may be the first victim who has survived long enough to fight back. That evening, Caroline and I sat in her living room, exhausted but unwilling to sleep. Daniel had returned home to avoid raising Vanessa's suspicions. promising to gather whatever additional evidence he could find. The house was quiet except for the ticking of the mantel clock and the occasional creak of old wooden beams settling in the cold. Then we heard at a car door slamming footsteps on the pavement, and a voice, shrill, furious, unmistakable. I rose and walked to the window. Vanessa stood in the middle of the street, her face twisted with rage, her carefully maintained composure finally shattered. She was staring directly at Carol Mine's house. Her hands balled into fists at her sides. The prosthetic belly was gone. She no longer bothered. With the pretense Luther Grant. She screamed, her voice echoing off the quiet suburban houses. You think you can hide from me? You think your little investigation is going to save you? Neighbors began appearing in doorways, drawn by the commotion. Porch lights flickered on up and down the street, but Vanessa did not seem to notice or care. She was beyond strategy now, beyond calculation. This was pure, unfiltered hatred. You will lose everything, old man. She shrieked into the night. Everything you have ever loved, I will make sure of it. Vanessa's screaming eventually faded into the night, replaced by the wail of approaching sirens. A neighbor had called the police. By the time the officers arrived, she had fled, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her threats and a street full of witnesses who had seen a woman unravel in public. Caroline gave a statement. I gave a statement. The officers took notes and promised to file a report. Their expression suggested they had seen domestic disputes before and expected this one to fade like all the others. But this was not fading. This was escalating. 2 days later, Graham called an emergency meeting at his office when I arrived. He was seated behind his desk with a stack of documents spread before him, like evidence at a crime scene. His face was drawn, his usual composure strained by whatever he had uncovered. Daniel was already there, sitting in the corner, with his hands clasped between his knees, looking like a man awaiting sentencing. "Sit down, Mr. Grant." Graham said, "What I'm about to show you is not easy to hear." I took my seat and braced myself. Graham slid a folder across the desk. Inside were copies of loan applications, bank statements, and credit reports. The same documents he had shown me days earlier, but now annotated with handwritten notes and highlighted passages. I have completed a full forensic analysis of the accounts opened in your name. He began. The situation is worse than we initially believed. He pointed to a summary page 3 personal. Loans totaling $180,000 were opened over the past 2.5 years. Using your identity, the funds were dispersed to accounts that trace back to shell companies, entities that exist only on paper with no real business activity. From there, the money was transferred multiple times before disappearing into accounts. We are still trying to identify. My stomach turned. $180,000 borrowed. In my name? Borrowed and spent. Graham confirmed the money is gone. Mr. Grant, but the debt remains. And here's the critical problem. He pulled out another document. This one marked with red ink. One of these loans, the largest one. $85. 000 is 30 days from default. The lender has already sent preliminary notices. If payment is not made, they will begin collection proceedings. And because your home address was listed as collateral verify location on the application, they will move to place a lien on your property. The room seemed to tilt. They can take my house. They can begin the process. Graham said carefully. Foreclosure is not immediate. But once a lien is attached, your ability to sell, refinance, or transfer the property becomes severely limited. You would be trapped unable to access your own equity while the legal battle plays out. I turned to Daniel. He looked up at me with anguished eyes, the weight of his unwitting participation crushing him visibly. "I did not know, Dad," he said, his voice breaking. "Vanessa told me the loans were to help her mother. She said Brenda had medical bills piling up, treatments, that insurance would not cover. She made it sound like an emergency. I never saw the actual documents until it was too late. I had no idea she was using your identity. I wanted to be angry. Part of me was angry at Vanessa, at Brenda, at the years of manipulation that had brought us to this moment. But looking at my son's shattered expression, I couldn't direct that anger at him. He had been deceived by the woman he loved, trapped by his own trust. I'm continued spreading out another set of papers. I've had a handwriting expert examine the signatures on these loan applications. The preliminary analysis is clear. They do not match your authentic signature, Mr. Grant. The letter formations are different, the pressure inconsistent, the slant artificially mimicked. This is forgery, plain and simple. Hope flickered in my chest. Then we can prove it. We can show the loans are fraudulent. We can... Graham agreed, but not quickly. A formal handwriting analysis requires expert testimony, court certification, and cross-examination by opposing counsel. The process takes months. Months we may not have before that first loan defaults. He stood and walked to his window, his back to us. For a moment when he turned around, his expression had hardened with resolve. I'm filing emergency motions today to freeze all accounts associated with these fraudulent loans. I'm also initiating contact with federal authorities. The money crossed state lines. It was transferred through banks in Arizona, Nevada, and Colorado before vanishing. That makes this wire fraud. Mr. Grant, a federal crime carrying serious penalties. Daniel looked up sharply. Federal? Does that mean Vanessa could face federal charges? Vanessa and her mother both. Graham replied, if we can prove they orchestrated this scheme together, they are looking at years in federal prison. But we need time to build the case, and we need to stop that loan from defaulting before it destroys Mr. Grant's financial standing. The next 48 hours were a blur of phone calls, FX documents, and legal filings. I barely understood. Graham worked around the clock, coordinating with banks' credit agencies and a federal prosecutor's office that had suddenly taken interest in the case. I spent my days at Caroline's house pacing, waiting, trying not to imagine the walls of my home being stripped away by strangers on the third night. My phone rang just before 10 hours. Graham's name appeared on the screen. I answered immediately, Mr. Grant. He said, his voice grave. The federal prosecutor agreed to open an investigation into Brenda Reed. They started pulling records this afternoon. I gripped the phone tighter, and there was a long pause. When Graham spoke again, his tone had shifted to something I had not heard from him before, unease. If they keep digging into Brenda Reed, he said slowly, they are going to find something much bigger than we imagined. The next morning, Graham arranged a meeting at his office with Officer Linda Carver when I arrived with Caroline. Linda was already seated at the conference table, a thick manila folder open before her. Her expression was different than it had been during our previous conversations, harder, more determined, as if she had crossed some invisible threshold from investigation into personal mission. Please sit down. She said, what I'm about to share with you comes from coordination with federal investigators and law enforcement contact in 3 states. I want you to understand the full picture before we discuss next steps. I lowered myself into a chair, my heart already racing. Graham stood by the window, arms crossed his face, unreadable. Linda opened the folder and spread out a series of documents, employment records, legal filings, newspaper clippings yellowed with age. 15 years ago, Brenda Reed was employed as a senior account manager at First National Bank in Phoenix, Arizona. She specialized in retirement accounts and estate planning services for elderly clients. She paused, letting the words settle. She was very good at her job, too. Good. She slid a document toward me. It was a termination letter, heavily redacted but still legible in key sections. The bank conducted an internal audit after several elderly customers complained about unauthorized transfers from their accounts. The investigation revealed that Brenda had systematically defrauded at least 12 clients over a 4-year period. She would befriend them, gain their trust, and slowly drain their savings through small, difficult-to-notice transactions. My stomach churned. 12 people at minimum. Linda confirmed the bank estimated total losses at over $400. Zero. But here's the part that matters. Instead of prosecuting First National, chose to settle quietly. They reimbursed the affected customers, terminated Brenda, and sealed the records to protect their reputation. She walked away without a single charge filed against her. Caroline leaned forward. She got away with it completely. Linda said no criminal record, no public disclosure. She simply moved to another state and started over. She pulled out another document, a marriage certificate. 3 years later, she married a man named Richard Reed in Nevada. He was a widower, 68 years old, with substantial retirement savings and a paid-off home. The pattern was coming horrifyingly clear. Richard Reed died of a heart attack 2 years into the marriage. Linda continued. By then his savings were gone. His home had been refinanced twice. His children from a previous marriage tried to contest the estate, but Brenda had power of attorney and all the legal documentation she needed. She inherited everything, sold the house, and disappeared again. I felt sick. How many times has she done this? Linda's jaw tightened. We have confirmed 2 additional victims before you. Mr. Grant Walter Simmons in Arizona, whom I mentioned previously, and a man named Eugene Porter in Nevada. Mr. Porter lost his home, his pension, and his dignity. 8 months after his case was dismissed for insufficient evidence, he took his own life. His suicide note mentioned a woman who had stolen everything he had ever worked for. He did not name her directly, but the timeline matches perfectly. The room fell silent. I thought of Eugene Porter, a man I had never met, sitting alone in an empty house with nothing left but despair. I thought of Walter Simmons dying in a state nursing facility, abandoned and forgotten, and I realized with chilling clarity that I was supposed to be next, another nameless victim in a pattern that stretched back decades. This is not a daughter-in-law with a bad attitude, Linda said, her voice hard. This is a systematic family. Fraud operations spanning multiple states. Brenda Reed has been doing this for at least 20 years, and at some point, she began training her daughter to continue the work. Graham spoke for the first time. We have testimony from a former neighbor of the Reed family in Arizona. She remembers Brenda coaching Vanessa when she was a teenager. The neighbor overheard Brenda telling her daughter something she never forgot. He glanced at his notes. Old people have money but no strength. You just need patience. The words hit me like a physical blow. Vanessa had not become cruel by accident. She had been raised for this, shaped and molded by a mother who saw elderly people not as human beings, but as resources to be harvested. Every insult, every exclusion, every calculated humiliation, it was all part of a playbook written long before I ever met her. You are the 3rd confirmed victim, Linda said, looking directly at me. But you are the first one still standing, the first one with evidence, with witnesses, with a support system. If we can build this case properly, we can bring down not just Vanessa, but the entire operation. We can get justice for Walter Simmons, for Eugene Porter, for every person these women have destroyed. For a long moment, I could not speak. The weight of what I had learned pressed down on my chest like a stone. I was not just fighting for my house or my dignity. I was fighting for the ghosts of men who had been silenced, erased, forgotten. Graham's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, frowned, and stepped out of the room to take the call. When he returned 2 minutes later, his face had gone pale. That was the county clerk's office. He said slowly, Vanessa has just filed a petition for emergency guardianship over Luther Grant. My blood ran cold. Guardianship. Graham nodded grimly. She is claiming you are mentally incompetent, unable to manage your own affairs, suffering from cognitive decline that makes you a danger to yourself and others. He set the phone down on the table if the court grants her petition. She will have full legal control over your finances, your property, and your life. You will not be able to make a single decision without her approval. Linda's expression hardened. She's trying to end this before we can expose her. Yes. Graham agreed. And if we do not act fast, she might succeed. The guardianship petition arrived by courier the following morning, a thick filled with legal documents that read like a character assassination. I sat at Caroline's kitchen table and forced myself to read every word, each sentence cutting deeper than the last. Vanessa's lawyer had painted a portrait of a confused, deteriorating old man who could no longer be trusted to care for himself. The petition cited observable signs of cognitive decline, erratic and paranoid behavior, and an inability to manage personal and financial affairs. It claimed I posed a risk to myself and others, and that immediate intervention was necessary to protect me from my own incompetence. Graham had warned me this was coming, but seeing the words in print made them feel terrifyingly real. If the court granted this petition, Vanessa would become my legal guardian. She would control my bank accounts, my property, my medical decisions. I would not be able to sell my house, access my savings, or even choose where I lived without her approval. Everything I had worked for over 65 years would belong to her legally and completely. This is her nuclear option. Graham explained during an emergency call that afternoon. She knows we are closing in. So she is trying to neutralize you before you can testify. If you are declared incompetent, nothing you say will carry legal weight. Your testimony becomes worthless. Your accusations become the ramblings of a confused old man. The court moved faster than I expected. Within 48 hours, a judge had reviewed the petition and ordered a psychological evaluation to determine my mental competency. I was given the name and address of the evaluating psychologist, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, and an appointment time 3 days away, 3 days, to prepare for the most important test of my life. I barely slept during those 3 days. Carolyn tried to reassure me, reminding me that I was sharp, capable, fully in command of my faculties. But doubt crept in during the quiet hours of the night. What if the stress of everything I had endured had affected me more than I realized? What if Vanessa's lies contained a grain of truth I could not see? I was 65 years old. My wife was gone. My son had been turned against me. My life been upended in ways I still struggled to comprehend. Was it possible that I was not as strong as I believed the morning of the evaluation? I dressed carefully in a pressed shirt and clean trousers. I wanted to look like what I was, a retired professional, a man of discipline and order. Carolyn drove me to the psychologist's office, a modest brick building on a quiet street lined with oak. Trees. She squeezed my hand before I stepped out of the car. Margaret would be proud of you. She said, remember that Dr. Eleanor Hayes was a woman in her early 50s with calm eyes and a manner that put me at ease despite my nerves. Her office was warm and uncluttered, filled with soft light from a large window overlooking a garden. She gestured to a comfortable chair and sat across from me with a notepad in her lap. Mr. Grant, she began, I want you to understand that this evaluation is not a test you can pass or fail. I am here to get an accurate picture of your cognitive function, your memory, your reasoning, your emotional stability. Just answer honestly, and we will proceed from there for the next 90 minutes. She guided me through a series of exercises and questions. She asked me to remember lists of words and recall them later. She showed me patterns and asked me to identify what came next. She gave me simple math problems and logic puzzles, then gradually increased the difficulty. She asked me to draw a clock showing a specific time, to name the current president, to explain the difference between a bridge and a tunnel. Then she asked about my life. She wanted to know about my career as an engineer, the projects I had worked on, the challenges I had solved. I told her about the Riverside Bridge, a structure I had designed 30 years ago that still carried thousands of cars every day. I explained the mathematics of load distribution, the importance of accounting for wind shear and thermal expansion. She listened intently, occasionally making notes. She asked about my daily routines. I described my morning's coffee at 6 a walk around the neighborhood breakfast. While reading the newspaper, I explained how I managed my medications, my finances, my household. I told her about the journals I kept, the letters I wrote, the books I read. Finally, she asked about my current situation. I explained everything: Vanessa's abuse, the fraudulent loans, the threats, the investigation. I spoke clearly and calmly, laying out the facts in chronological order. When I finished, she studied me for a long moment. "Mr. Grant," she said, setting down her notepad, "I have conducted hundreds of these evaluations over my career. I have seen genuine cognitive of decline, and I've seen people falsely accused of it. You fall firmly into the second category." She paused, a faint smile crossing her face. "You are completely mentally competent. In fact, you demonstrate sharper cognitive function than many people half your age. Your memory is excellent. Your reasoning is sound. And your understanding of your situation is remarkably clear." Relief flooded through me like warm water. I had to grip the arms of the chair to keep my hands from shaking. "I will submit my report to the court today," she continued in my professional opinion. "There is no basis whatsoever for a guardianship. The petition should be dismissed." I thanked her more times than was probably appropriate, and walked out of that office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The sun was shining, the oak trees rustled in a gentle breeze. For the first time since my birthday, I allowed myself to believe that I might actually win this fight that evening as I sat in Caroline's living room, watching the shadows lengthen across the floor. My phone rang. Graham's name appeared on the screen. "Luther," he said, his voice carrying a weight I had not heard before. "There is something you need to see, something Margaret left for you." He paused. This time Graham's words echoed in my mind as I set down the phone. Something Margaret left for me. Caroline had hinted at this weeks ago, standing by that old wooden chest with secrets in her eyes. Now finally the moment had arrived. Caroline was already moving toward the corner of the living room, where the chest sat waiting. She knelt before it slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the lid. I watched her reach past the leather journal I'd already seen and retrieve something from the very bottom, a sealed envelope, cream-colored and heavy with my name written across the front in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. Margaret's handwriting, the elegant loops and careful curves that had filled decades of birthday cards, grocery lists, love notes, tucked into my lunch pail. Seeing it now 3 years after her death felt like hearing her voice whisper across the distance between this world and whatever came next. Carolyn placed the envelope in my hands. "She made me swear not to give this to you until you truly needed it," she said softly. She knew that day would come. She just hoped it would not. I turned the envelope over on the back. In the same familiar script was a date 3 weeks before Margaret had passed away. 3 weeks she had been so weak by then, barely able to sit up in her hospital bed, and yet she had found the strength to write this, to seal it, to entrust it to her oldest friend with instructions that spanned beyond her own life. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly around. Something small and hard. I set the object aside for the moment and unfolded the letter. My vision already blurring with tears. "I could not stop my dearest Luther," she had written. "If you are reading this, then what I feared has finally happened. I'm so sorry I'm not there beside you. I wanted to be. I wanted to protect you myself, but the cancer had other plans. And all I could do was prepare. I had to pause and breathe. The words were so unmistakably or practical, even in emotion. Loving, even in warning. I knew Vanessa was dangerous long before you did. I saw the way she looked at you when she thought no one was watching. I saw the contempt she hid behind her smiles. I tried to warn Daniel, but love made him blind. He could not see what was standing right in front of him, and I could not make him look. The letter continued on the other side of the page. The handwriting slightly shakier now, as if written during a moment of exhaustion. I did something I never told you about. I hired a private investigator to look into Vanessa and her mother. His name is Samuel Torres, and he is thorough. What he found terrified me. Luther, these women have done this before. They have destroyed lives, stolen everything from people who trusted them, and walked away without consequence. I could not let that happen to you. I reached for the small object that had been tucked inside the envelope. It was a USB drive, black and unassuming, the kind that could hold 1,000 documents or a single photograph. But I knew even before reading the next lines that this tiny piece of plastic contained something far more valuable. Everything I'm your discovered is on this drive. Investigation reports on 2 men these women targeted before bank records, showing Brenda's suspicious transactions, witness statements from neighbors and former colleagues in Arizona, and a signed affidavit from Samuel himself certifying the authenticity of everything he gathered. I stared at the drive in my palm, scarcely able to comprehend what I was holding. Margaret had built a case file from her deathbed. While the cancer was stealing her breath, she had been assembling weapons for a battle she knew I would one day have to fight. Use this to protect yourself, my love. And if you can use it to help the others they have hurt, no one should suffer what those men suffered. No one should die alone and forgotten because of women like Vanessa and Brenda. The final lines of the letter were written in a steadier hand, as if Margaret had summoned the last of her strength to make them clear. I have loved you for 41 years. Luther Grant. I loved you when we were young and foolish. I loved you when we built our home together. I loved you through every ordinary day and every extraordinary one, and I love you still, even now, even from wherever I am. Never forget that. Never let them make you forget. She had signed it, simply yours forever, Margaret. I sat motionless for a long time, the letter pressed against my chest, tears streaming freely down my face. Caroline did not speak. She did not need to. Some moments are too sacred for words. Margaret had seen the storm coming years before I ever felt the first drop of rain. She had watched Vanessa with clear eyes, while the rest of us remained blind, and when she realized she would not live to stand beside me, she had done the only thing she could. She had left me a map, a shield, and a sword. Thank you, Margaret, I whispered into the empty room. My voice breaking. You never stopped protecting me. The USB drive changed everything within hours of examining its contents. Graham was on the phone with federal prosecutors, his voice carrying the urgent energy of a man who finally held all the cards. Margaret's private investigator had been thorough beyond anything I could have imagined. The files contained detailed reports on Walter Simmons and Eugene Porter, the 2 men Brenda had destroyed before setting her sights on me. Bank statements showed patterns of small, methodical withdrawals designed to avoid detection. Witness statements from former neighbors described how Brenda had isolated her victims, cutting them off from friends and family until they had no one left to turn to. Combined with Caroline's 3-year journal, Daniel's testimony about being blackmailed, the forged loan documents, and Linda's police investigation, the case was overwhelming. Graham presented everything to the federal prosecutor's office in a meeting that lasted 4 hours. When it was over, the lead prosecutor, a stern woman named Rebecca Torres, made a single phone call. The FBI took over the case the following day. I learned later what happened next. Agents in Arizona and Nevada received orders to reopen the cold cases of Walter Simmons and Eugene Porter. Investigators, who had once dismissed those cases as unprovable, suddenly found themselves reviewing evidence they had overlooked or ignored. The pattern that had seemed invisible 8 years ago now blazed with terrible clarity. The family of Eugene Porter, the man who had taken his own life after losing everything, was contacted by federal agents and informed that the investigation had been reopened. His daughter, a woman named Patricia, who had spent years trying to convince authorities that her father had been victimized, broke down crying when she received the call. Finally, she said, her voice captured in a recording that Graham later shared with me. After 8 years, someone finally believed us. I listened to that recording alone in Caroline's living room, tears sliding down my face. Eugene Porter had died, believing no one would ever know the truth. His daughter had carried that burden for nearly a decade. Watching the woman who destroyed her father walk free, now at last there would be justice. But the case was not complete without one final piece of evidence. Daniel came to Caroline's house on a Tuesday evening, his face pale but resolute. He carried a laptop under his arm and a USB drive in his pocket. When he sat down across from me, his hands were steady for the first time in weeks. "I need to do this," he said quietly. "For you, for myself, for everything I should have done years ago." He opened the laptop and inserted the drive. A video file appeared on the screen. He hesitated for just a moment, then pressed play. The footage showed a party at his house, the same party where Vanessa had gotten him drunk and made him sign the fraudulent documents. The camera angle was slightly off, as if Brenda had been trying to film discreetly while pretending to check her phone. But the audio was clear. Vanessa's voice, sweet and coaxing, guided Daniel's hand to each signature line. "Just sign here, honey, and here it is, just routine paperwork." Daniel's words were slurred, his movements clumsy. He was clearly intoxicated, barely aware of what he was doing. And then Vanessa looked directly at the camera and smiled, a cold, triumphant smile that revealed everything about who she truly was. "This proves I was coerced," Daniel said, closing the laptop, "and it proves she knew exactly what she was doing." He handed the drive to Graham the next morning by doing so. He was risking everything, his freedom, his reputation, his future. But he was also finally standing up, finally choosing truth over fear. The arrest came 3 days later. Federal agents descended on Vanessa's house at 6 a.m, catching her still in her bathrobe. She screamed obscenities as they read her rights, insisting this was all a misunderstanding, threatening lawsuits and revenge. The agents were unmoved. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. With a sound I imagined echoing through the quiet suburban street, Brenda was arrested simultaneously at her apartment across town. Unlike her daughter, she did not scream. She ran, a 60-year-old woman sprinting across her front lawn in bedroom slippers, desperately trying to reach her car. She made it 6 steps before an agent tackled her onto the grass. The neighbors watched from their windows as she was hauled to her feet and placed in the back of a federal vehicle. I was not there for either arrest, but Graham described every detail to me later, and I found myself savoring each one, not with cruelty, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had been pushed to the edge and refused to fall. 2 weeks later, the court made its announcement. The case had drawn significant media attention, and the judge decided it warranted a public trial. The case of Grant versus Reed, the official statement read, will be heard before the entire state. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial. Journalists filled the back rows, their notebooks open and pens ready. Families of the previous victims sat behind the prosecution table, their faces drawn with years of grief and unanswered questions. I took my seat beside Graham, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and fear. 3 months of preparation had LED to this moment. Vanessa was LED and wearing an orange jumpsuit. her wrists shackled in front of her. She scanned the room with cold eyes, and when her gaze found mine, she smirked that same confident, dismissive expression I had endured for years. She still believed she could manipulate her way out of this. She still thought she was the smartest person in the room. The prosecutor, Rebecca Torres, rose and began reading the charges: elder abuse, financial fraud, identity theft, forgery, coercion, conspiracy to commit wire fraud across state lines with each word. Vanessa's smirk faltered by the time Torres finished. Her face had gone. Pale Graham presented the evidence, methodically building his case, like the engineer I had once been, each piece connecting to the next, and each fact, reinforcing the ones before: Carolyn's journal, Margaret's investigation files, the forged loan documents with their mismatched signatures, Daniel's video showing Vanessa coerce him while intoxicated, the testimony of bank officials, handwriting experts, and federal investigators. The pattern was undeniable. The truth was overwhelming. But the moment I will never forget came when Linda Carver took the stand. She sat straight-backed and composed her voice steady as she described her investigation. Then the prosecutor asked why this case mattered so much to her personally. Linda was silent for a long moment before answering. Years ago, I worked a case involving an elderly man named Arthur, she said quietly. He came to me with bruises on his arms and fear in his eyes. He told me his caregiver was hurting him. I believed him, but I didn't push hard enough. I let the case slip through the cracks. 6 months later, Arthur died alone in a hospital bed. His injuries had never healed. Her voice wavered. I swore that day I would never let that happen again. I would never let another victim be silenced. She looked directly at me. Today I kept that promise. The trial lasted 2 weeks. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom fell absolutely silent. Vanessa was found guilty on all counts, 12 years in federal prison. Brenda received 18 years. The enhanced sentence, a consequence of Eugene Porter's suicide, being ruled a direct result of her fraud for the first time since her arrest. Brenda showed emotion. She wept as the bailiffs led her away. The families of Walter Simmons and Eugene Porter received restitution from the seized assets. Patricia, Porter Eugene's daughter, embraced me outside the courthouse afterward. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." 6 months later, I sold the house where Margaret and I had raised our son. It held too many memories, some beautiful, many painful. I needed to start fresh in a place untouched by Vanessa's cruelty. Margaret had already chosen that place for me. Hidden in her files was a deed to a small piece of land in Montana, 10 acres of meadow and forest at the base of a mountain range. She had purchased it secretly 5 years before her death, intending it as a retirement gift for both of us. She never got the chance to tell me now. Standing on that land for the first time, I understood why she had chosen it. The silence was profound. The air was clean. The mountains rose in the distance like sentinels guarding a sanctuary. Daniel came with me. He quit his job in the city and dedicated himself to repairing the old farmhouse that sat on the property. He learned carpentry from library books and YouTube videos. His hands growing calloused and capable, we worked side by side most days, speaking little, but understanding much. The relationship we had lost was slowly being rebuilt, not through grand gestures, but through shared labor and honest conversations over dinner. Caroline visited in autumn when the fields had turned golden and the aspens blazed with color. We walked together at sunset, talking about Margaret, about forgiveness, about the strange and winding paths that life sometimes takes. There was warmth between us. Not romance, but something equally precious. Understanding, companionship. The comfort of being truly known on my 66th birthday. I stood alone on the porch of my new home. The mountains glowed pink and orange in the fading light. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke somewhere behind me. Daniel was preparing dinner, the clatter of pots and pans drifting through the open window. I looked up at the sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear, and I whispered the words I had been carrying in my heart for months. I made it, Margaret. I'm finally free. The wind stirred the grass soft and gentle, almost like an answer. And my story was only beginning in a place where no one could ever hurt me. Again, that was my story. A story about trust and betrayal, about the quiet cruelties that happen behind closed doors, and about the strength it takes to stand up when everyone expects you to stay silent for years. I believed that enduring abuse was the price of keeping my family together. I told myself that swallowing my dignity was easier than causing conflict. I convinced myself that my son would eventually see the truth on his own. I was wrong about all of it. What I learned through this journey is that silence does not preserve peace. It only gives predators permission to continue. Vanessa and Brenda counted on my silence. They built their entire scheme around the assumption that I would be too proud, too ashamed, or too exhausted to fight back. They believed that an old man with a broken heart would simply fade away, taking their secrets to the grave. But I didn't fade. I found my voice, and with the help of people who refused to look away. Carolyn, who kept her promise to my wife Graham, who fights. For those, the world forgets Linda, who carried the weight of past failures and turned them into fuel for justice. And Daniel, who finally broke free from the woman who had imprisoned him. I survived. If you are watching this, and you recognize something familiar in my story, please know that you are not alone. Elder abuse happens in millions of homes across this country. It happens to people who are loved and people who are forgotten. It happens in wealthy families and poor ones, in cities and small towns. And it thrives in silence. Do not be silent. If you know someone who might be suffering, reach out. If you are suffering yourself, speak up. There are people who will believe you. There are laws designed to protect you. There is hope even when the darkness feels complete. I would love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you are watching from tonight, and if this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it. Your voice might be the one that saves a life. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, it is never too late to begin again.